The human mind is a fragile thing, easily swayed by logic, yet forever drawn to the unexplained. We often dismiss the whispers in the dark, the shadows in our peripheral vision, as tricks of the light or an overactive imagination. But what happens when those whispers grow louder? When the shadows solidify? What happens when the familiar comfort of your own home turns into a cage of creeping dread, and the things you thought you knew about reality begin to unravel, thread by terrifying thread? This is the story of Sarah, a young woman who, like many of us, believed in the concrete, the tangible, until a series of unsettling events forced her to confront a truth far more terrifying than any ghost story. Sarah, a freelance graphic designer, had just moved into an older apartment building in a quiet part of the city. The rent was affordable, the location ideal, and despite the building's age, it had a certain charm. Her first few weeks were a blur of work, unpacking, and settling into a new routine. She'd often work late into the night, the only sounds being the gentle hum of her laptop and the occasional distant city murmur. One evening, deep in a design project, she heard it for the first time. A faint scratching. A hesitant, almost rhythmic sound, coming from what she presumed was the kitchen wall. She paused, listening intently. Mouse, she thought, shrugging it off. It was an old building, after all. But the scratching seemed deliberate. Too consistent for a rodent. She got up, walked to the kitchen, and tapped on the wall. The sound immediately stopped. Sarah attributed it to coincidence, a nervous twitch of an unseen creature, and returned to her work. But the scratching would return, night after night, always when she was alone, always just on the edge of her perception. Then came the objects. Small, everyday things that would inexplicably shift. A coffee mug she'd left firmly in the center of the counter would be found precariously close to the edge. A book on her nightstand would be turned to a different page. At first, she blamed herself, absent-mindedness, fatigue. She even wondered if the building was simply settling, causing vibrations. But the occurrences grew more frequent, more distinct. It wasn't just things moving, it felt like they were being moved. The air in her apartment began to feel heavy, oppressive. The once charming silence of her nights transformed into a suffocating quiet, punctuated by the occasional, inexplicable creak or groan from the walls. She started leaving lights on, even in rooms she wasn't occupying. Sleep became a luxury, her mind racing with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Was someone else in the building? Was there a logical explanation she was missing? Or was something far more sinister at play? One night, the scratching returned with a vengeance, louder this time, accompanied by a soft, rhythmic thud. It sounded like something was being dragged across the floor above her, then dropped. She sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding. She tried to rationalize it, upstairs neighbors, maybe. But then, she saw it. In the doorway to her bedroom, a shadow. Not just a trick of the light, but a distinct, human-like silhouette, darker than the surrounding gloom. It stood there for a moment, unmoving, then slowly receded into the darkness of the hallway. Sarah froze, paralyzed by a terror so profound it stole her breath. She didn't scream, couldn't scream. She simply stared, wide-eyed, until the first rays of dawn pierced her window. The next day was a blur of frantic phone calls to her landlord, to friends, even a local handyman. Everyone offered logical explanations: old pipes, faulty wiring, an active imagination. No one believed her. How could they? She sounded hysterical, even to herself. She spent that day packing a small bag, convinced she couldn't spend another night in that apartment. But as she was about to leave, a strange impulse stopped her. A chilling curiosity, a desperate need to understand what was happening. She decided she would try to document it. She bought a cheap security camera, set it up in her living room, and left it recording. The footage from the first night was unremarkable, mostly just an empty room. The second night, however, yielded something horrifying. A small picture frame, sitting on a shelf, simply toppled over. No visible force, no vibrations. It just fell. Sarah watched the replay countless times, her blood running cold. This was proof. But proof of what? She became obsessed. She set up more cameras, meticulously documenting every unexplained occurrence. The faint whispers, the subtle movements, the chilling shadows, they were all there, captured in the grainy footage. She showed it to friends, but they offered only pitying looks and suggestions of stress. Some even hinted at psychological help. Sarah felt increasingly isolated, her reality slipping further and further away from everyone else's. She was living in a nightmare, and no one believed her. Then came the whispers, clearly audible now, not just to her, but to the recordings. Faint, guttural sounds, distorted and incomprehensible, but undeniably there. And the shadows, they weren't just in her doorway anymore. They moved within her peripheral vision, just beyond the reach of her cameras, always watching. She felt an undeniable presence, a cold, malevolent gaze that followed her every move. She wasn't just sharing her apartment with something, she was being stalked. The final night was a symphony of terror. The scratching turned into furious banging. The whispers became guttural growls that echoed through her apartment. Objects were thrown, not just falling, but hurled with unseen force. Sarah barricaded herself in her bedroom, trembling, clutching her phone, but too terrified to even dial for help. She knew, with chilling certainty, that whatever had been lurking in the shadows was now actively trying to get to her. She could hear it outside her door, a heavy, dragging sound, followed by loud thumps, as if something was repeatedly slamming itself against the wood. The air grew frigid, and the stench of decay filled her room. The thumping continued, growing louder, more insistent, until the door began to splinter. Sarah screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror. She could hear the wood groan, the hinges strain. And then, through a newly formed crack in the door, she saw it. Not the full form, but an eye. A single, gleaming, impossibly black eye, staring directly back at her, filled with an ancient, unspeakable malice. It was too close, too real. The barrier between her world and whatever nightmare had invaded it was about to shatter. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Sarah bolted. She didn't know how she found the strength, but she scrambled over the barricade, threw open her front door, and ran. She ran down the hall, down the stairs, out into the cold night air, not stopping until she was blocks away, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her face. She never looked back. She never returned to that apartment. And to this day, she still wakes in a cold sweat, haunted by the memory of that black, malevolent eye, forever imprinted on her mind. Was it a ghost? A demon? Or something far more terrifying, a glimpse into a reality we are not meant to comprehend? Sarah doesn't know, and she never wants to find out. But she knows, with absolute certainty, that some horrors are not confined to the pages of fiction. Some horrors are very, very real.